Welcome back to episode 2, season 2 of the Learning Curve Podcast at ECSD. It's great to have you here with us once again. Today, we want to explore the concept of emotional intelligence. As you tune in, I invite you to reflect on the importance of emotional intelligence in your own personal and professional lives. Think about those moments in your life where emotional intelligence played a significant role. For me, one such moment occurred when I was faced with a challenging situation outside of work. We were at a barbecue. I was having a conversation with a friend about assessment practices. Something was said by my friend in support of an assessment practice that I think is harmful to students. Immediately, I felt uncomfortable and angry that this person would say such a thing. Instead of reacting impulsively, I took a step back. I took a moment to validate my own emotions. I said, I'm angry about this, and considered the perspectives of my friend, who is not an educator, but is a parent. This allowed me to respond with empathy and understanding, instead of making any accusation. In the end, my friend intended no harm by what they had said, and welcomed the openness of the conversation that ensued, where we addressed the issue of the outdated assessment practice. We both left with a better understanding of each other's ideas and how to respectfully support children through assessment practices that benefit all students in the education system. It was a powerful reminder of the impact of emotional intelligence and that it can have on our relationships and overall well-being. Now let's take a moment to center ourselves in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Loving God, as we gather here today, we seek your guidance and grace. Help us explore the realm of emotional intelligence with open hearts and receptive minds. Grant us the wisdom to understand our own emotions and the empathy to connect with others on a deeper level. May this podcast serve as a catalyst for personal growth and the cultivation of emotional intelligence in our lives. In your name, we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'd like to acknowledge that we are recording today on the traditional land of Treaty 6, the ancestral territory of diverse Indigenous peoples. We also recognize the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 and the contributions of Inuit and other Indigenous communities who have nurtured this land for generations. With gratitude, we honor their stewardship and resilience. As we embark on this journey of growth and learning within the episode, we understand that true progress lies in recognizing and respecting the wisdom, knowledge, and teachings passed down by Indigenous cultures. We commit ourselves to embodying the principles of emotional intelligence as we strive for personal and collective growth, and as we work towards restoring and honoring the truth and reconciliation calls to action. In unity, we call upon all our communities to engage in a profound understanding of the diverse peoples who call this land home. Together, let us foster an environment where emotional intelligence flourishes, where the richness of Indigenous cultures is celebrated, and where the path to reconciliation is paved with respect, empathy, and collaboration. May our collective journey towards growth be guided by humility, compassion, and a shared commitment to truth and understanding. In today's episode, we have another exciting agenda packed with insightful discussions and thought-provoking content for you. First, we'll begin with The Learning Lab by Jennifer Espejo-Hersemiak, where she'll lead us through the fascinating world of neuroscience. Today's topic is dual coding. For our interview today, we are joined by Alicia Burdess. Alicia is a numeracy lead on the teaching and learning team for Grand Prairie and District Catholic Schools. Alicia brings us a wealth of knowledge and experience with thinking classrooms from her many years of teaching math. She studied under Peter Liljedahl, and in this episode, will share her journey in creating thinking classrooms and shifting her assessment practice in mathematics. Our segment Mindset Matters with Tracy Halusawascu will help us through a discussion on the significance of emotional intelligence in fostering positive relationships, empathy, and self-awareness. We'll explore how emotional intelligence contributes to our overall well-being as teachers and the well-being of our classrooms. In Lit Literature, Alison Gabucci will take us on a literary journey as she reviews a book or professional learning article. Today's review will be on the text Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. That wraps up our agenda for today's episode, from the fascinating concept of dual coding to thinking classrooms and math, emotional intelligence, and a toe into culturally responsive teaching. We have an episode filled with knowledge and inspiration for you. And on that note, let's jump right in.
Welcome to the Learning Lab, where we decode the brain's secrets of learning. I'm your host, Jennifer Espejo-Harrisimiak, ready to take you on a synaptic saunter as we explore the captivating world of dual coding, where blending visuals and words ignite cognitive fireworks. First, what is dual coding? Well, it's a learning technique that combines visual and verbal information to facilitate better comprehension and retention. By engaging both visual and auditory pathways in the brain, dual coding helps create multiple connections and associations with the information being learned. This synergistic approach taps into our brain's natural inclination to process and integrate different forms of information simultaneously. That is how dual coding leverages the way our brain works. Our brain is a complex network of interconnected regions, each responsible for different cognitive functions. When we engage in dual coding, we activate multiple regions simultaneously, fostering a more integrated understanding of the material. One key region involved in dual coding is the visual cortex, part of the occipital lobe we talked about last time. This visual cortex processes and interprets visual information. Visual stimuli, as diagrams, charts, or images, can provide a powerful aid in learning. They serve as a visual representation that complements verbal information, helping us visualize concepts, relationships, and patterns. This visual input stimulates our brain's ability to create mental images, making the information more vivid and memorable. In addition to the visual cortex, dual coding also engages the language-related regions, such as the Broca's area and, again from last time, Wernicke's area, which are involved in language comprehension and production. Verbal explanations, whether delivered by a teacher, read from a textbook, or heard in a video lecture, provide the verbal component of dual coding. The combination of visual and verbal elements creates a rich and multimodal learning experience that taps into different cognitive processes simultaneously. So, how can we implement dual coding effectively? Here are a few practical tips. Number 1, utilize visual aids. Incorporate visuals such as diagrams, illustrations, infographics, or mind maps to accompany verbal explanations. These visuals should be clear, relevant, and reinforce key concepts. Number 2, pair visuals with verbal explanations. When presenting information, provide verbal explanations alongside the visual aids. This could involve narrating while displaying a diagram or describing the connections between the visual elements. Number 3, encourage student-generated visuals. Foster an environment where students can create their own visuals to represent concepts. This can be through drawings, concept maps, or other creative means. By engaging in the process of creating visuals, students actively encode the information and strengthen their understanding. By adopting dual coding strategies, we can tap into the power of visual and verbal processing in our brain, enhancing comprehension and retention. Let me leave you with one final point to ponder until our next episode. How might you incorporate dual coding into your teaching practice? Let us know in the comments.
Welcome to another episode of the Learning Curve at Edmonton Catholic Schools. Today our guest is Alicia Burdess. She's the numeracy lead for the teaching and learning team for Grand Prairie and District Catholic Schools. Welcome, Alicia. So we're just going to jump in. Would you mind sharing a bit about your career so far and what brought you into education?
Fun story. I will try to make it short. So I was always going to be a sports doctor, And that changed during university. And then I decided I was going to be a teacher. So I kind of got all my phys ed degree pieces transferred over to my after degree. And it turned out that a lot of my credits were kind of math science related. So I had a university instructor in my teaching degree who, for the first time, was able to help me link math to being something real, and it wasn't just a bunch of numbers. So then I decided right there that I think I was going to be a math teacher. So forget being a phys ed teacher. I was going right into math. My journey since then has been absolutely exciting and wonderful. We have had so many people, for some reason, in Grand Prairie, Alberta, who have come here to inspire us and to work with us. And one of my big moments, well, there are many of them, but have been with Dr. Peter Liljedahl with his Thinking Classroom framework. So he has been doing work with teachers in Grand Prairie since 2011 was when I finally looked back to see when we did start our journey with him. He had been doing some PD sessions. Even then, teachers were always, wanting to know, okay, what do we do about assessment? What do we do about assessment? So he always kind of answered, we'll get there when you're ready. Keep assessing how you've always been assessing until you're not happy with it. And then we'll find a way to make it work. So even back then, we were still talking about, okay, but what about assessment? So I was able to do a master's with him and his team from Simon Fraser University. And that was kind of where I really decided that this was going to be my focus. So fast forward, teaching junior high all this time. I did a little stint as an assistant principal, and I've been a numeracy lead a number of times, kind of, helping out with new curriculum, helping support teachers in their classrooms. And really, really my passion is thinking classrooms and how to make all of these pieces fit in with thinking classrooms.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I'm holding on to that piece you just said about assess how you've always been assessing until you're unhappy with it. Talk about that journey a bit for yourself.
Well, it's been an interesting one. So I just trusted Peter and I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep assessing. And I mean, when I started teaching, we only assessed how we had always been assessed, right? It's that whole idea of we teach how we were taught. And it is a big thing to teach differently than how we were taught because it's just so ingrained in us systematically and, traditionally and what we're used to. So when we start as teachers and we want to kind of change the world and we want to do things differently, it's really hard to make those changes. So it's always just these little steps forward. When it comes to assessment, so I only knew quizzes, pop quizzes, unit tests, chapter tests. And it just wasn't working because I could see that my kids knew so much more. And then when it came to the quizzes and the tests and the multiple choice, they just really weren't showing me what they knew. So from there, I kind of naturally started doing things like pulling the kids aside and asking them to help explain what they knew. And even that alone, having kids explain to me what they understood, even within the framework of a traditional test, made me realize that they did know so much more. So then it was my job to figure out how much more and how to get that information out of them. So that was kind of like the beginning. And for a long time, I didn't do anything differently because I didn't really know what to do. Always in the back of my mind thinking, no, there must be a different way to do it. So this is the best part. It was only a couple of years ago, Peter offered a summer graduate course, and there were a whole bunch of people who signed up for it, and it was on assessment. So it was a lot of people who had either done masters with him or who had been kind of like jumping in on the thinking classroom journey, people across Canada. I think there were even people outside of Canada, and we all kind of signed up for this course through Simon Fraser University, and it was online with Peter. And one of my colleagues, Nikki, joined with me, and she had done the second cohort master's program with him. So he's actually come up to Grand Prairie twice, and he's run 2 master's cohorts up here. And it was like our aha moment. So, it's like 2022, and it's kind of on the tail end of like all of the COVID pieces. And Nikki and I looked at each other and we were like, we finally get it. Right. So, I mean, and since all of our work with Peter, like he's now come out with his book and there's a whole chapter on assessment and there's ideas, and my name is in one of the little like exemplars for a student, which I thought was really funny. And I didn't realize until just a few weeks ago. But it was then that we realized how we could implement it, because we were always struggling to link it to grades because we're still kind of bound by the percentages. And Peter calls it docking with the mothership. So it was really his whole framework of you're looking for data and you're looking for evidence, and it's not event-based. So it doesn't have to be a quiz. Your quiz, it doesn't have to be your data. But the questions on your quiz could be part of your data. And it's linked to outcomes, not events. So instead of having a unit exam that could cover, 5, 6, or 7 outcomes, we could, and then count that as a mark that you put into your mark book. We could look at the questions individually, find out where those link to the outcomes, and then each one of those questions is a piece of data. It's a piece of evidence, because that's what we want to know. We want to know what our kids know. So then it kind of dove into this whole journey of, okay, how are we going to make this happen? And Nikki was in a grade 10 classroom. So our question was, how are we going to make this happen in a grade 10 classroom? So part of our assignments for this course was to take something that we had learned in the course and implement it into a classroom. So I was an assistant principal at the time, and Nikki was teaching grade 10. So Nikki's like, okay, it's June. Like, this was the end of May. She had June left, June in Alberta, we all know what that's like as teachers. Yep. So she had one outcome left, and it was systems of equations. So it was how to solve systems of equations through substitution, graphing, and I think there's another way that I don't know off the top of my head. So I said, okay. So I said, I have the problem for you. So there's this problem, and it's called the caps and umbrella problem. And basically, it's images that kids can create systems of equations with. So she started off her unit with that problem. All she did was post that problem on her whiteboard, put her kids in random groups at vertical surfaces, and 50 minutes later, they had all had these aha moments. They had figured out a solution. They had solved it in all kinds of different ways. Nikki did a gallery walk. She did consolidation, and she was blown away by how her students responded. So the first idea is you're in the thinking classroom. And then the second idea was like, okay, how are we going to figure out how to assess this? So keep in mind, she's going to try to do this all in like a week. So then what happened was she started again with the problem, and they looked at the different ways that they were supposed to solve through systems of equations, through substitution and graphing, and the other one. And then she gave them choice. So she set up this map, and she said, okay, how are you going to show me that you understand all of these ways? And so what she did is she mapped out some of the things that she had suggested. So whether it was like a check your understanding, whether it was a notes package, whether it was a little like one question quiz. She had a bunch of different things. But one of the biggest pieces that the kids chose was writing a solution to tell her how she solved the caps and umbrella problem. And when we looked at these solutions that these kids did, and some made posters, some made these just presentations, some wrote the story word for word, kind of how it happened, what happened. Some had pictures, some had diagrams. You could see how much they understood. So for her, she was like, well, what else do I need to do? They have this solution. They have all of their explanations, all of their understanding of this outcome. So on her framework, she had listed I think she had like 6 or 7 I can statements that kind of fell under that outcome. And then the job was for them to all collect data to figure out, okay, how are we going to show that we understand all of these 7 I can statements? Keeping in mind that this is just one outcome. You don't even need that many marks, right, to go into a report card for one outcome. So she said that experience had helped her collect so much data about her students on top of their understanding of the outcome, about how they learn, how they work as a group, how they communicate. And at the end of the day, the students self-assessed themselves. And then Nikki and I sat and we went through all of their data and we tried to kind of fit it into the framework. And the marks were so similar. So it was really empowering to see that kids actually do have an idea about where they sit, and that it really correlated with Nikki's work.
That's amazing to hear. I hear like pieces of research that I've read just jumping into my mind.
At the end of it, I think there were 2 students that Nikki didn't have enough data for. So guess what? She had to chase 2 students, right? So we all say things like, well, what about all the kids who don't get it in or we don't know enough about? Well, then we chase them. And there were 2 of them to chase. So it was much easier. So the one student, she said she had him come in at recess or lunchtime, and she had 3 questions for him to work on. And she sat with him and he worked through the questions. As he was working through the questions, she asked him questions. They had a conversation. And then at the end of that, she had enough data for that student for that outcome, right? And if there's a student that, I think there was one student actually who just didn't come back, then she didn't have enough data. So that's her reporting, is I didn't have enough data to assess this outcome for this student.
Yeah. It kind of simplifies things. We're kind of opening up the classroom so that the students are putting forth their thinking and their work.
Yeah, and we asked the students what they thought, and they loved that they had choice. They loved that there was a variety of ways to show their understanding, that it wasn't always on an exam or in an exam format. So they were really engaged with the process. And there was one student, I mean, from the get-go, he had this comment, and it was like, this was my first math epiphany. So here, Nikki and I are just like, kind of tearing up. And it was a really amazing experience. And it wasn't more work. It was more work in our minds to think of like, how are we going to do this? It was more of that piece that was the hard part. But once we got it going, you realize that you don't have to mark a 40 question exam. You're just looking at what you need to know from those kids, and that data and that evidence is going to show you what they know, and that's going to translate into a mark.
For our listeners who have not read any of Peter's work or are new to thinking classrooms, could you define for us what you mean by a thinking classroom?
So I think that my favorite way to describe it is a classroom, a culture, a community of thinkers that has been built intentionally through following Peter Liljedahl's framework on building thinking classrooms. So the first three pieces are that students work in random groups at vertical surfaces on a thinking task. Now, my favorites are like the big, beautiful problem types, like painted cube, how many lockers are open, 1 to 100, squares on a checkerboard. There's a lot in his book as well, but it's to kind of build that community of problem solvers. Give them something really fun, really engaging. Watch them for 45 minutes, get caught up in it. Even those questions, like 4 fours is another good one. There's a ton of good thinking tasks, but it's the whole idea of like getting them engaged, getting them persevering, getting them working together, getting them communicating. So I would do as many of these as I could all year long. Peter strongly suggests at least for 2 weeks to really build a community. And once you have a community of thinkers, kids will think about anything. So you could take a worksheet, one question at a time, put it on a whiteboard, get them in a random group at a vertical surface, and they will think about it. And they will talk about it. And then you can be ready with the next level question and then the next level question. Students learn to kind of use the knowledge around the room. So sometimes they might do gallery walks. They might go and they might look at other people's work. The teacher then can help with consolidating by, specifically guiding them to people's work that they want them to look at and talk about and think about. That kind of the second process is called thin slicing, and that's just the whole idea of just starting with something that's basic and just get a little bit more difficult every time. So that's it. You get your kids excited, you get them engaged, you get them thinking. The whole idea of having them at vertical surfaces is like upending the traditional classroom setting. They're not sitting, they're standing. Okay, this is weird. What's going to happen next? Right? They're not working by themselves. They're working in a group. Okay, interesting. What's going to happen next? Oh, wait, here's a really cool problem to engage with. Figure out how you can communicate, collaborate, problem solve together. And then that's where you're starting your work with your thinking classrooms. And then there's other pieces, how do you provide hints and extensions? Obviously, how do you assess comes up. But those first 3 tools in the toolkit, random group, vertical surface, and giving them a rich problem to think about, is all you need to do to get started.
That's a pretty comprehensive description that you provided for us there. I have a question. With these rich problems, how do you curate them? How do you find them in relation to the outcomes provided by the Alberta curriculum?
Well, that was my whole question too. I was like, where do we get these big problems? And Peter says people ask that all the time. Where do we get these rich tasks? How do we link them to outcomes? So a group of teachers and I we curated one for grade 8 in following the Alberta Program of Studies. So we linked all of our favorites into that resource. We kind of split it up into 3 chunks. The first chunk was questions to build or problems to build your thinking classroom. The second chunk was problems that specifically target, in our opinion, the grade 8 outcomes. And then the third chunk was, because we couldn't stop, so we just collected like every other awesome thing that we thought, and we wanted to put it into the document so that we had it forever. So they're kind of like our untested problems, even though we've used quite a few of them since then. So it's been around for a while. So it's on my website. Anyone can download it. We also had, and that was made by a group of teachers. We got together. Some of us had done Peter's master's program, and some others were just teachers who really wanted to be involved. So we ended up creating a grade 8 resource. It took us a year. And then we had another group of teachers who created a grade 2 resource, and a group of teachers that curated a grade 3 resource. Now, the 2 and 3 are linked to the old curriculum. But because all of these problems are low floor, high ceiling, like people take the grade 8 resource and they use it, from grade 6 all the way to grade 12. People take the grade 3 resource and they use it from kindergarten all the way to grade 5. Like the low floor, high ceiling tasks, they're the ones that, everyone can be successful. Everyone can jump in at some point with it. A lot of them involve manipulatives for all the grades. I don't even want to say the younger grades because some of my favorite junior high school problems involve manipulatives. So that's one thing. There are Facebook pages all over popping up. Building Thinking Classrooms K-2, Building Thinking Classrooms 3-5, Building Thinking Classrooms, the main page. And there are also groups that are coming up for other subjects. Like there are some science groups coming. There's some LA groups coming. So people want to jump into this framework and they really want to start to make changes to their practice. So teachers are the best. Teachers are the best collaborators. So that's what I suggest. There's a ton of resource. I think Peter himself, there's going to be a task resource that's going to be published at some point, full of more tasks. But I think there's a lot of good starting points. Jo Bowler's U Cubed, she has a lot of rich tasks there. There's enriched math, and there's also teachers all over that have been kind of like starting to compile. So it's way easier now, I think, than it used to be.
That's excellent. Thanks for sharing. Just for our listeners, can you say the name of your website?
Oh, it's just www.aliciaburdess.com.
Perfect. And I'll link it in the show description for our listeners. And I think you beat me to the punch a little bit with your last comment there that other subject areas are starting to curate. I was going to ask, do you see transferability of your system or a thinking classroom to other subject areas?
Oh, for sure. And when we opened up our new high school here in Grand Prairie, Peter did come out and he did 4 sessions over the course of a year with all of our subject teachers. And so we had teachers in science doing thinking classrooms. We had teachers in LA and in social studies. And it's just taking little bits, right? It's just taking a piece of inquiry or a topic or an outcome and get them in random groups, get them at a vertical surface. One of my friends who teaches LA, she had them writing poetry. She had them writing thesis statements. She had them writing like essays together at vertical surfaces. Like there's a lot that you can do. And it's already just taking the wonderful things that you do in your class already and just get them into a random group, get them at a vertical surface, getting them thinking, engaging, talking together. And definitely, I think it's transferable. I was in a science classroom once and they were doing the electron model, vertical surfaces, random groups on their windows and whiteboards. So there's a lot of transference. I think every subject can be a thinking classroom.
All right. So we have a visual up for our listeners. So if you're listening to this just over Spotify, we invite you to come back to the episode and tune into the video version so that you can see Alicia kind of walk you through a framework that her colleague and her worked on.
All right. So this is created by Nikki Nightingale, and she was the teacher who was in a grade 10 classroom. It was June 2022. So I'll just walk you through it so you can get a few visuals to kind of tie into what we were talking about earlier or later, depending on where this is in the podcast. All right. So if you just scroll down. So this is what Nikki's unit map looked like. So if you can see kind of generally, you can see that on the left, there are I can statements. I'm looking at the both of the maps actually on the left have the same I can statements. And the teacher version at the top has those first, next, then, those 3 columns. I think before I said them backwards, I think I said first, then, next. Anyway, those 3 columns, which were that kind of mild, medium, spicy, or that basic, proficient, mastery kind of levels of assessment categories. So if you look at that top right one, you can see she kind of mapped pieces into each of the columns and each of the boxes where she thought that they fixed or where they fit. That bottom left image is for students. They get to put what they want to use as evidence. And then that bottom left image, the student version, that's what Nikki and I collected at the end. And we went through and the pieces that they wanted us to assess, that's what we assessed. Now, Nikki would fill that out on her teacher version. So then she had a visual of where the students were. So then at the end, when you see that little column at the very right, that's where the mark would go. So depending on where her evidence fell, if it was the first, which was 2, or the next, which was 3, or the then, which was 4, that's how she determined the mark that they got for each of those I can statements, which then determined their mark for that outcome. Keep in mind that we did often do 0.5s if we felt that the student was between a 3 and a 4. Sometimes Nikki would go back to the student to get clarification if she wasn't sure where they were, which also helped just provide more evidence.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify here. for our listeners, because you're working by outcome, you're only scoring using a 4-point scale. Is that correct?
Yeah. And well, what we would do then is we would actually translate that into a percentage, because we were junior high and high school. And so we were still reporting by percentage. That's what our requirements were. So if you are only using a 4-point scale, it's even more beautiful. But if you do have to translate into a percentage, we still found that this was the most accurate way to calculate that percentage. So all of those I can statements were out of 4. And then that outcome, we would just add all of those marks up together. And that would give us our final mark for that outcome.
Thank you.
So this was a problem that I was telling about, the price of the umbrella and the cap. So this problem was basically the basis for her entire unit for systems of equations. This was that problem that they worked on for like 50 minutes nonstop. And Nikki said it was the best class ever. So, just the power of giving a rich task and putting the kids in random groups, getting them at vertical surfaces. And here are some pictures. In that bottom right picture is a picture of Nikki consolidating. So the students are she's showing some of the pieces. She's asking questions. She's focusing on some of the pieces that she wants them to focus on. This is when they went back the second day. And when you start to take pictures of their work and when you start to ask them about their work and ask them to explain their work, they have so much more to give. You can just see it in the visuals. There's so much math happening at those whiteboards. This was that one student with the quote that made us cry. It was like a light bulb went ping in my brain. It was my first math epiphany.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And here are some examples. Now, Nikki has some great stories about these. There was one, actually it might be on the next page. So these are some of those solutions. Tell me the story of how you solved the problem, and then give them freedom to do it how they want to do it. Some students make videos. Some students make posters. Some students just write it up with diagrams and explanations and arrows and numbers and charts. These are 2 examples. And if you look at them, you can see that they're very different, but both of them show what the students know. And both of them actually show quite in-depth understanding. Okay, just a quick story. One of those posters, the student showed up and it was like the windiest day in Grand Prairie, which happens a lot, but half of the poster ripped and blew away in the parking lot and she couldn't get it. So she came and she was super upset. So she's talking to Nikki and Nikki's like, it's okay. And she's like, I'll redo it. And Nikki's like, it's okay. I have enough data. I don't need you to redo it. I already know where you are because of this framework, because I know I can see exactly what you know and I can see exactly what you've already shown me. So it was just awesome because, the old me would have been like, oh my gosh, you're going to have to redo it because I don't know where you are. But it was okay. So that was a beautiful story that came out of that as well.
Awesome.
So these are just some of the examples of the different pieces. So these were different options that students had to showcase their learning. So she had some little mystery number prompts. She had some check your understanding questions. She had some outcome-based quizzes. So there's just a notes package was part of it. So some students just really like to have their own notes. And Nikki made a guided package. So the students figured out how to fill those in to show their learning. So that was another option that they could use for assessment. Now, she didn't just take that one. It was just a piece of it, remember. So then at the end, these are the students filling out the student map. So how are they going to demonstrate their learning? So they're adding their pieces. Some students were confident enough in just their write-up solution, and that was enough evidence that they put that for all of them if they felt like that tied into each one of those I can statements. And then if Nikki felt that it wasn't enough, she would ask them for more evidence. So this was us going through and figuring out how to mark all of them. And we did it together just because we gave each other courage, and it was a nice way for us to talk about the process as we were doing it. These were what the students wrote for their self-assessments. Some were more than others.
What I love about this is you didn't have to create a template or anything. You just gave them a blank piece of paper and you asked them to justify.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And Nikki said that she was blown away by how closely it correlated. So these were just examples of the student self-assessment mark and our mark that was calculated from that framework. And there's a couple of them that are the exact same mark.
What I'm noticing in these is sometimes the student's harsher on themselves than you were.
Oh, Nikki said that was often the case.
Yeah.
Right. And if there was a big discrepancy, then there was just room for more conversation. Right. And when you take that, your framework back to the kids and you're like, well, this is the data that I have for you. So this is why I feel like this is your mark. Right. Then you can have a conversation around that as well. And they might come back and be like, oh yeah, you're right. I guess I didn't pick the right thing. Maybe I want you to look at this instead. Like there's a ton of room for conversation and collaboration there. This was just an example of 2 that were the exact same mark. So this was just the other piece these were the 2 stories that Nikki said about that student who came and half of her poster board. And then there was one student that just didn't come back. So he didn't have enough data. So he had insufficient evidence. So there was one kid that piece just, it didn't work. So she had what she had for him and that was it. So, if it wasn't the end of the year and if he would have come back to school, then we would have known how to approach that.
Yeah. And in Edmonton Catholic schools, we recommend that teachers, if that's the case, the student doesn't come back, just override their percentage grade with the code that we have in Power School that is insufficient evidence to assess. So i.e.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then these were some of the responses that we got from the students about the new process. Keep in mind, this is brand new. It was the end of the school year and Nikki just jumped on in and it happened. So it was a really amazing learning experience for all of us. So even if you have teachers that are interested in jumping in, do it the same way we did it. Pick one outcome, pick one unit, just try one little piece of it.
Yeah. I like that in this feedback. You got some really good pieces there, like having to explain the steps was challenging. I love that piece of feedback. That's what we want, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was challenging for us too. That's what we told the students. We were like, we were trying to figure this out as we were going with you. And we were honest with them. We were like, we're really excited to do this, but it's brand new for us too. And we really our goals are to give you choice and assessment. Our goals are to try to figure out a variety of ways to find out what you know. And the students were great. And Nikki loves talking about this. I think she might be presenting on assessment at the Makata conference. So if any of your listeners have the chance to go to the Math Council of Alberta Teachers Association conference, I think Nikki Nightingale will be presenting there on assessment.
Perfect. That's wonderful. So we have both Nikki Nightingale and Alicia Burdess's emails up for you, and you can reach out to them anytime.
Awesome.
As I've been talking with teachers who are interested in moving to this in their own subject areas, I think one thing that comes up is, how am I going to organize all this data and make sure that I have enough evidence? Can you speak a bit to your organization system here?
So in my grade 9 class, every student would have a portfolio, and I need help with my organization. So this is something that, as a teacher who struggles with that piece, this is what I found to work for me. So every student had a duotang, and that was their portfolio. And every outcome had its own paper. So every outcome had a paper, and the paper had I can statements on it. And then it was split up, like Peter does in his book, with the first, then next columns. Now, Peter, I think, has like basic, proficient, advanced. Some teachers have been calling it mild, medium, spicy. Nikki and I really just wanted it to be something that didn't have like an evaluative piece to it. We wanted it to be, so we really thought hard about what we wanted to call our columns. So we had first, and then we had then, and then next. But basically that first column is your 50% for us, because we were teaching junior high and high school, and that's just how we're docking with the mothership. So that first column was 50%. If you had enough evidence in that first column that shows me that you had a basic understanding, then that's your 50%. Then that next column was the proficient. And then that third column was kind of the mastery. And how we did it is that first column was a 2, that second column was a 3, that third column was a 4. And that's how the marks kind of came out at the end. Now, of course, using our professional judgment, there were some 0.5s in there. There were some students that weren't quite a 4, but were higher than a 3. So sometimes they were a 3.5 on that I can statement for that outcome. So every student had their outcome. And then what happened with their portfolio is I would try to get them to kind of showcase some of their best evidence. So whether it was a write-up solution, whether it was a check your understanding, whether it was an outcome assessment, because then I had some evidence tied to that page. So at the end of the year, I think in grade 9, I think there were maybe 19 outcomes. There were 19 sheets, and then a couple of pieces of like actual evidence behind those sheets. Now, some teachers have been amazing with technology. One of my good friends, who's actually a principal in our district now, he made a Google Doc, and each Google Doc was linked to the student's own Google Doc. And then they could self-assess, and then they could see, he could see what they put on, they could put what he sees. So there's so many things that teachers can do with this type of work. And I think it just lets us be more free to try to connect with our students and to try to connect with what they really know and what we know that they know, because sometimes we just know that they know it. And that whole idea of triangulation of assessment, right? Conversations, observations, products. And I think for generations, we've just been focused on products, right? Which is only 1/3 of the triangle. So where are conversations and where are observations? And I think we need to empower ourselves to realize that sometimes those are more accurate and more fair and more equitable than just relying on products.
Yeah, I think your statement of always doing what was done to us as students and that focus on the product, that's what was done to us as students when we were in the classroom. So giving ourselves that permission, like you said, as teachers to value those observations and value those conversations, because that's sometimes where we elicit the best evidence of student thinking.
Absolutely. And when you hear a student say something and you're like, okay, write it on a sticky, stick it in their portfolio, right? There's all of these ways that we can, if we do feel like we need some kind of paper trail, we can create that paper trail. I got to the point where I just felt confident enough. Now, keep in mind, I've been teaching since 2005. So I teach at in the 10 program here at the college at Northwestern Polytech. And I tell my third year, fourth year education students, I said, keep in mind, this is a 17-year journey for me at this point. So I assessed just how you've all been assessed for the entire first, 15 years of my career. And it's only now that I feel like I have the tools, the skill set, and the confidence to make such a big change. And I'm hoping that makes them realize, okay, we don't have to change everything at once. And I hope that gives courage to teachers to try something new and to take a risk, right? Because it is always really hard when we're trying to change what we are currently doing, as well as what other people around us are currently doing, right? We have to there's that whole teacher tension of, what if I do things differently and other people don't like that I do it differently, and having that confidence to do it.
So for our listeners, we're recording in the month of September, the first couple weeks of school here. So I'm hoping that this episode comes out in early October for our listeners. With the beginning of the school year in mind, I'm hearing that your system has a lot of routine behind it with the students. Can you speak to how when you were in the classroom, you established these types of routines with your students?
Well, at the beginning, I think it was just explaining to them, this is the outcome. These are the I can statements that I have to use to gather evidence for your understanding. And we are going to be in this journey together where we're going to figure out how we can best assess. So sometimes there's going to be choice. Sometimes it's just going to be taking an older unit exam that I had, and then we would go through it together and we would map it out. Okay, this first question, what outcome do you think this hits? So say we were working on fractions, and in grade 9, there's more than one outcome on fractions. So does this one hit operations with rational numbers? Which one? We would go through it together. And then we would say, okay, is this a mild, medium, or spicy? What category does this fall in? Kids are brilliant at it. It was really fun. So say that's all I had. Say that's what I started with. I was like, okay, I just had this unit exam. I'm going to use it. We're going to go through it together and we're going to decide. And we would do it after they would write it. Okay, so they would write this exam or the pieces of it that I wanted them to write. And then afterwards we would map it, because then they had a better idea of was it mild, medium, spicy? Where did it fall in the framework? Or we use first, then next. Or you could use easy, medium, and hard. We just didn't like that language. But that's the idea. And kids would be like, oh, that one was easy. And some of the ones that I thought would have been more difficult, they thought were easy. So then it almost became even more authentic, right? So this is something that you could do for every unit if you wanted to, depending on how your units and how your classes are arranged. And if you're spiraling your curriculum, that's the other thing is the students learned that they could come back and they could reassess. So if we worked at fractions in September or October, and then in January or February, they're like, I actually get it. They have every opportunity to come back. And then I could give them another check your understanding page, or I could give them a couple of practice questions and we could reassess those. So I think it's just at the very beginning when you're just getting started is to look at your outcome, figure out some I can statements that fall under that outcome, and then figure out with your students how you want to assess. And remember, it's 2 to 3 data points that you need. So if they have 3 data points at that mastery level, that's good. That's what you need. You don't have to have 10 things. So it's funny, my reporting system, like we use PowerSchool, in my PowerSchool, there aren't a whole bunch of marks. There's a mark for each outcome. And under that mark for each outcome, that's where you could look at my sheet and you could see how I assessed and where my evidence was for that outcome. So I think it's just like start with one little piece at a time. You do not have to do your whole year differently if you don't want to. You can just start with one piece to take that risk and to start to feel comfortable with it. The other thing that I use quite a bit is for an outcome, we would create a check your understanding. And on that check your understanding page, a one pager, that first top of the page would be some basic questions. Then that middle section of the page would be some more intermediate proficient questions. And then there would always be a mastery extension question at the bottom. And so that's a really good piece of evidence because you can see how well the students can understand some of those type of questions. And they're already kind of laid out. So the kids would realize, okay, I rocked these basic questions. So I already have my 50. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push myself to work on these proficient type questions. And maybe later when I'm ready, I'll come back and I'll do the extension question at the bottom. Because sometimes my extension question had different outcomes involved in it too. So maybe they just weren't ready for that extension question, but they always knew they could come back and they could reassess that extension question.
I've heard a lot of teachers talk about formative and summative assessment. And I think a misconception that I hear often with formative and summative is formative doesn't count and only summative counts. But your system is a bit different. We're just collecting evidence of learning and we're giving credit to the outcome. If the student shows what they know, understand, and can do in relation to that outcome at any point in the process, they get the mark.
Yeah, formative and summative, in my mind now and in my heart, everything's formative until it has to be summative, and then it's in your grade book. So it just, because that's what assessment's for. It's for learning. It's for supporting kids. It's so they know where they're at and where they need to go. So in my mind, it's all formative until it doesn't have to be, and we need to dock with the mothership and we need to put it in the grade book. And even then, it's only too late when it's really too late and the report cards have been sent home and it's the end of the year. So, and I get a little bit of pushback for that because I get it. We can't just constantly be running around all of our students all of the time. But when your students start to buy into this, they'll take responsibility, right? And you're not chasing as many as you used to be chasing, in my opinion. In my opinion, you actually chase fewer students because you have a way better understanding of what they know. And not all students have to show you on every single assignment or every single piece of work. So if students miss a class, they don't have to make up for that. You just have to find a way to figure out how you're going to assess them on that outcome. And they'll have lots of opportunities, right? So it kind of takes that burden off a little bit. If you're expecting every kid to complete every task, every learning activity, every quiz, then I feel like that was also overwhelming the way we used to be doing it. So to me, this is actually less overwhelming because not every kid needs to get everything done because you have multiple opportunities to assess them and they have multiple opportunities to show you what they know.
Talk to me a bit about when you first had, so you're working in your portfolios and now you're having students submit their evidence to you. Say, hey teacher, I want you to look at these pieces. Talk to me about how that went. How did you build that routine and that ownership in for your students?
Well, that took a bit, and that's also because of my personality and my organizational pieces. So sometimes I would just ask them, I'd be like, you know what, I really want to use this problem solving write-up as part of your evidence in your portfolio, because it was something that was really meaningful, in my opinion, to the students and myself. So if, we did the painted cube problem, which is one of my all-time favorites, if you haven't done it, the painted cube problem, but then that problem solving solution was part of their portfolio. So some pieces I would just be like, can you please? And then I would just collect them all. And sometimes I'd be like, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to put them all into our portfolio. So some of them were very directed like that. And then some of them were more, okay, how do you want to show? And I was just kind of getting started in this. So I'm sure teachers can take this and run with it. And kind of like Nikki, she'd have that map and she'd be like, okay, here's the outcome. Here are the different I can statements. What are you going to use? Are you going to use your check your understanding your check your understanding questions? Are you going to use this unit outcome that we did? Are you going to use your exam? And also sometimes if there was an exam, sometimes there weren't, often there weren't. But if you did use an exam, you could specifically just use certain questions of the exam too. So sometimes we would take an exam and we would map it out like we had said. And then if the students would write which questions in there, if they got it right. So let's say it was an easy, lower, basic question, check mark, question 3, exam. Okay. And then say they got a more medium type question, check mark, question 6, exam. And then say they attempted a spicier type question and they didn't quite get it. They would put an X. Okay. If it was a silly mistake, they could add an S, kind of how Peter talks about in his book. And then they'd say question 8, exam. So you kind of have this view. You're like, okay, I can see. So sometimes it would be the exam data or those different pieces. And it just depended on kind of where I was. And because I was playing with it, it changed month to month. So I think it really becomes, what's going to work best for the teacher? How do they like to organize things? And how are they going to kind of build that community of learners and ask the kids what they think is a way that they would like to be assessed. It doesn't have to be different for every kid because once you have the framework set up, that differentiation piece, I think, will happen more naturally anyway. So it's not a really good answer because assessment is just such a personal thing, but I'm hoping it gives people freedom and the permission to try something different.
That's wonderful to hear from you and hear you speak about how you uncovered that process for yourself and how ends up working. I just want to maybe play a little bit of a stick in the mud here. One thing that always comes as a concern to teachers as I'm talking about just collect evidence of learning and then report on the outcome is the summative assessments that are common throughout the province that we have to adhere to in Alberta, those PATs, the provincial achievement tests, and the diploma exams. And because those exams feel like they're structured differently than a thinking classroom is structured, how do you square away your teaching style and this process with those summative assessments?
Well, it's something that I've lost sleep over, last more than a decade. But my students always seem to do the same. So it's funny because, you have these big hopes that they're going to do better. You have these big hopes that, all of a sudden you're going to find like that key to the PAT. So throughout this whole process, my students, which actually makes me feel better, they're not doing worse on their PATs. They're doing about the same. So if I'm 17 years in and they're still doing about the same, then that kind of makes me feel at least that I'm not letting anyone down. But what I'm seeing in my classroom is what is so, so important. I'm seeing students engaged. I'm seeing students excited. I'm seeing students working together. I'm seeing students communicating. I'm seeing students have choice and agency. And I'm seeing students standing up for themselves and what they believe they know in assessment, and they believe what they can show. I just think that's been what's keeping me going. And at the end of the day, they've been doing about the same year to year on their PATs. So we could talk all day about standardized testing and PATs and, the validity of some of those pieces. But in my heart, I know that those PATs are not telling us the whole story. And we all know that about our students. So at the end of some of my first years of diving into thinking classroom work, because I went all in, because I had Peter's support, we had our master's cohort support. So, I probably went way over here in implementing it. That's what I realized, was that it was worth it because what I was seeing in my classroom and what I was seeing in my students. It doesn't have to be that extreme. The little changes can also add up to help and to support. But I don't know. I just really think that students want to learn and they want to love learning. And I think it's our job to give them something worthwhile to think about, to learn, to work together, to achieve, to challenge, to get some inquiry happening, to solve some big, beautiful problems, and to get the joy back in teaching. And I'll never go back because it is so much fun that it makes my job so much better too, right? So you'll never be bored because your kids are constantly learning and you're constantly learning. And that's the other thing. Assessment seems like it's like a new game every year. Like every year, you're going to get better at it. You're going to change things. You're going to find things that you like. You're going to find things that you don't like. And I think that's just part of it. That's part of our careers. Our jobs will never be boring because we can constantly change and improve and try new things.
Thinking back to your first year teaching mathematics, where I'm going to make the assumption that it was more traditional, you were doing what was done to you, compared to how you teach mathematics now. If I were to ask your students in the past versus in the present, what would they say about mathematics?
Well, I used to do all of the mathematics when I first taught. So that was one of my big moments. I was teaching grades 7 and 8, and I just realized at one point that I was staring at the whiteboard and I was doing all of the math. I would ask a couple of really low level questions to, see if my students were keeping up with me kind of thing as I did all the math. And what I realized is that, holy smokes, I got really good at junior high math as I was teaching it to myself, basically. So I think they would say that we didn't do a lot of math, but now my students do all the math. I'm just there to help them do the math. They're the ones who are thinking. They're the ones who are talking. They're the ones who are problem solving. They're the ones that are doing the work. And I'm just there on the back end to figure out how to help them consolidate, to figure out how to help them practice in a way that can help them, become more confident in their skills. Trying to figure out a way to collect that evidence and to see, okay, where are we going to go next? Where is this going to take us? My year plans never work out, by the way, because it depends on where the kids are to determine where we're going to go next. And it always veers sideways. So I don't know. I really hope that they would say that math is something that's empowering and engaging and fun. And I would really hope that some of the damage that has been done to society over mathematics could start to shift so that they would say, actually, math didn't hurt me. I can use math as a useful tool and I can see it as being beautiful and helpful. And and a fun thing to do.
A question I always get from teachers who are maybe a bit more hesitant to start, because we all know we get parents who might be really involved and really want to know what's going on, and they want to be able to calculate that final grade. What has parents' response been to your system?
This is the crazy thing. We are so worried, and it is so few people that actually have questioned my assessment. So few, less than 3 over the course of my career. So we put a lot of that on ourselves. I know we do, because we want to feel like we're doing the best for our students. And what happened with those 3 parents on 3 separate occasions, they just needed to know that I knew what I was doing and that I was confident in their students' ability to show me what they know. And really, they just needed an explanation. And once they knew that piece, they left and they felt way better about it. It's so scary for parents when they hear that their kids are being taught differently than how they were taught. Even though when you sit and ask them, most of them don't like how they were taught. And most of them will come and say, actually, yeah, you know what, that didn't really make sense to me at the time. But because they don't know what it looks like and they can't actually picture what it might look like, it's just that extra conversation with them. Three people have had big questions about it over the course of my career. And that's very common. Peter says that too. He's like, there's not a lot of people that will come. But we just are so scared of it happening because we're not sure, because we're taking risks ourselves. We're not sure how other people are going to take it. So often it's just an honest conversation. This is why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I don't feel like this multiple choice test tells me who your kid is as a learner. And parents are like, yeah, you're right. You know, or they'll be like, well, I was really good at multiple choice tests because I learned how to game the system and I was just really good at figuring it out, which also doesn't really necessarily show what you know. So oftentimes it's just that. It's just when those pieces happen, when they have those questions, it's just sitting down and explaining to them why you're doing it. And often that why is what's most important. Why? Because I care about your kid. Why? Because I want your student to be able to tell me what they know in a way that works for them. And yes, we can still practice some of the other pieces, because then they get concerned about, well, if you're not doing any multiple choice, how are they going to be prepared? So in my grade 9 class, which is a PAT year, we would do some multiple choice. I would take one question, put it up on the wall, and I would have 5 or 6 around the room, one question at a time. And the kids would work in their random groups at the vertical surfaces, and they would go over the PAT practice questions. And it was still happening in a thinking classroom. So there are still a lot of opportunities to practice other ways. And the other thing was, I'd always say, don't worry, they're also getting a lot of that practice still in other classes. So it made me feel better and it made them feel better. And, the students are resilient. They just kind of jump in.
Wonderful. I think that's a grounding reminder that conversation is powerful. And if someone's questioning you or your process, just have a conversation with them. You usually can move through it.
Yeah, for sure. It makes a big difference. It's such a personal thing. And that's why I feel like we never get anywhere. I shouldn't say we never get anywhere, because of course we are getting somewhere, but it feels sometimes like we're never getting anywhere with assessment, because it's not just the blanket approach. It can't just be like, this is what you're going to do, because otherwise it takes everything out of what we're trying to create, right? If all of a sudden we're like, I remember a time teachers, well, even maybe still now, teachers are told like, you need this many assessments into Power School by the end of this period, or you need these type of assessment, or you need to have, and some people use the word, like you were saying, formative assessment as like practice exams. And some people put those in their Power School, calling them formative assessment practice exams, right? There's such a variety of how people use these terms and how we understand these terms. And I think at the end of the day, it's just such a personal journey that it's really hard to make systematic change other than just empowering teachers to kind of move along in their journey. So,
excellent. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the episode here. So one question that I ask to all of my guests is, it's quite a big one. So take it where you want to take it. You can have many or just one. What's a dream that you have for education?
One of my biggest dreams for education is that kids can find joy in learning. My colleague and I have been running math camps at some of our schools. We took some of that government funding that we got for learning loss, and we decided we wanted to make it something that was joyful and memorable. So every day for 2 weeks, we went into classes. We did grades 2, 3, and 4, and we ran a math camp. And the premise of our math camp was that we wanted 2 weeks of joyful, engaging learning where kids were adding tools to their toolkits. So they got a box that they had to create and they had to put together, which was a problem in itself, and it was amazing to watch. And then they created a brain, and every day was mixed with a mindset message from Joe Bowler, an engaging problem linked to a children's book, and then practicing figuring out what strategies work for number sense, subitizing, addition, subtraction. So in 2 weeks, we got through those main pieces. But every day was something fun. Every day was something that was deep, that was connected, to try to kind of get them something that they could base their math identities on. Everyone's a mathematician. Everyone can think deeply. Everyone can be slow at math and actually learn it their own way using their own strategies. And then what we would do is we would learn a strategy on a number line, and then they would add the number line to their toolkit. Or we would use subitizing cards to practice subitizing, and they would add those to their toolkit. So I would love if learning looked, sounded, and felt like that on a daily basis. If kids were excited, if kids were engaged, if kids had something really meaningful to think about, if they had permission to work together and to problem solve and to take risks and to make mistakes and believe that they can learn anything. Because we put a lot of pressure on thinking that we have to teach kids everything before they hit 18, which is really funny because I'm 43 and I'm not even close to being done with my learning. So I really want to be able to, us as teachers, inspire kids as to realizing that, like, wait a minute, you have the rest of your lives to learn. So let's make it joyful. Let's make it engaging. Let's make it fun. And also let's empower ourselves to realize that we can all learn and we can all improve and we can all be passionate about something that we want to continue learning about. That's my dream.
That's a wonderful dream to have. So if I'm summarizing what I heard is that learning is joyful.
That is perfect.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast episode today, Alicia. We appreciate your time and your insight and your expertise in assessment and in thinking classrooms.
Thank you so much, Julia. It was a pleasure being here.
Emotional intelligence refers to the ability to understand, manage, and express emotions effectively, both in ourselves and in others. It plays a significant role in our personal and professional lives. For teachers, emotional intelligence is essential in creating a positive and inclusive learning environment. Teachers with high emotional intelligence are better equipped to understand the unique needs and challenges of their students. They can empathize with their students' feelings and perspectives, establishing a strong connection based on trust and respect. This connection sets the stage for effective teaching and learning. One key aspect of emotional intelligence for teachers is self-awareness. Understanding our own emotions, triggers, and biases allows teachers to regulate their reactions in the classroom. This self-awareness helps them maintain composure even in challenging situations, promoting a calm and supportive environment for their students. Furthermore, teachers will develop emotional intelligence so that they may recognize and address the emotional needs of their students. They are attuned to the subtle cues and nonverbal communication that may indicate a student's emotional state. By acknowledging and validating these emotions, teachers create a safe space where students feel understood and supported. Another crucial component of emotional intelligence is social awareness. Teachers with high social awareness can perceive the dynamics within the classroom, fostering a sense of belonging for all students. They actively promote inclusivity, celebrate diversity, and create opportunities for open dialogue and collaboration among students. When teachers prioritize emotional intelligence, they enhance the learning experience for their students, motivated and willing to take risks in their learning. They feel comfortable expressing their own thoughts and ideas, knowing that their teacher values their unique perspectives. Emotional intelligence helps teachers address conflicts and behavioral issues effectively. By approaching such situations with empathy and understanding, teachers can guide students towards positive resolutions, building their emotional resilience and social skills in the process. Developing emotional intelligence is a lifelong journey for teachers. It involves self-reflection, professional development, and ongoing growth. By investing in their own emotional intelligence, teachers become role models for their students, demonstrating the importance of empathy, self-regulation, and respectful communication. In conclusion, emotional intelligence is not only vital for teachers, but for creating an optimal learning environment. Teachers who possess emotional intelligence foster stronger connections with their students, address their emotional needs, and promote inclusivity, leads to increased student engagement, motivation, and overall academic success.
Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain is an essential read for every educator seeking to create an inclusive, equitable, and effective learning environment. This insightful work offers a revolutionary perspective on teaching, arguing for the necessity of integrating neuroscience with a culturally responsive pedagogy to optimize learning for all students, especially those from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. The book presents a compelling argument that traditional teaching methods often fail to engage diverse student populations effectively by not taking their cultural backgrounds into account, and proposes that understanding students' unique cultural contexts and leveraging neuroscience in an easily digestible format can lead to more effective, targeted teaching that is sensitive to all students' needs. Hammond definitely outlines that culturally responsive teaching can help students move from dependent to independent learners, ultimately fostering higher cognitive abilities through ready-to-implement cognitive routines, in addition to building learning partnerships with students, creating intellectually challenging classrooms, and promoting the idea of a growth mindset. Hammond's work helps to challenge and disrupt deficit thinking, a perspective where educators might unintentionally hold lower expectations for students based on their cultural or linguistic backgrounds. By providing a clear understanding of how culture and cognition intersect, the book pushes teachers to recognize and reject these harmful biases, fostering a more equitable learning environment. Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain is a groundbreaking and practical guide that bridges the gap between neuroscience and the cultural dynamics within the classroom. It's a must-read for educators committed to improving their pedagogy, challenging systematic inequities in education, and creating classroom environments where all students are empowered to learn.
As we come to the end of the episode, we encourage you to reflect on the insights you've gained and consider how you can apply the principles of emotional intelligence in your own life. Remember that it's through self-awareness, empathy, and effective communication that we can cultivate stronger relationships and navigate life's changes with grace and resilience. We extend our sincere appreciation to our guest, Alicia Burdess, for sharing her wisdom and expertise, and to all our listeners who make this podcast possible. Your support and engagement inspire us to continue exploring meaningful topics that empower educators, students, and lifelong learners. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media, where we share additional resources, updates, and engage in conversation with us. Follow us on Instagram at ECSD Learning to join our thriving community of educators committed to personal and professional development. Please like and subscribe to the podcast to stay up to date about future episodes as we delve deeper into topics that empower educators in their assessment practice. We hope today's episode has ignited a spark within you to further develop your assessment practice and try building your own thinking classroom. As you continue on your journey of growth, may you find joy, fulfillment, and meaningful connections along the way. Thank you for joining us on the Learning Curve Edmonton Catholic Schools podcast.